See film Blackness, American cinema, and the idea of black film. I just wanted to talk about this because Sinners came out and it was a black film that was getting a lot of controversy, a lot of praise, but also there was people that was trying to put it down. And different people in the industry, like the infamous Variety article that wanted to talk about the different types of money statistics that was going on with the film because it was an original film made by a black person. And so I just wanted to go and look at this particular type of article and book. I don't have the full book. It's like 288 pages, only 28 pages when I decided to get a free trial, and I canceled that shit right after. But I'm just going to be reading it, and then I'm also going to put it on my YouTube channel. That way that people could be able to see it without any interruptions, right? Okay. Because that's just like every time I try to have a conversation, right? Let's see. I'm not doing acknowledgments. No offense to anybody. In the epigraph, Sherman Alexei dryly arrests an audience member's expectation and perception that his story be unscripted. A direct reflection of reality in the barest of autographed terms, his narrative of this encounter with his white woman exemplifies the collapsing of the distance between two fictions, one writerly and the other a socio-cultural marker of being. Indian and Indian are conflated, and the performative becomes reduced to unmeditated existential accounting in the absence of a consideration of verismil- veris- verisimilitude or just literary form and style more generally. The woman's empathetic response to Alexei's reading illustrates an inability to distinguish the author's function from embodied being. The epigraph evinces my concern for an investment in the idea of black film. In a comparable sense, the woman's query and expectation correspond to the way that black film and black art more broadly navigates the idea of race as constitutive cultural fiction, yet this art is nevertheless often determined exclusively by the social category of race, veracity, claims about black existential life in very debilitating ways. But this book does not merely equivocate about the debilitating ways of social reflectionist approaches, accounting for black film in a manner that does not adhere alone to a focus on how cinema must oblige, pretend, and emblematize social truth requires attention to cinema as an art practice with intended and consequential questions of form and politics. This is something that I always wonder when I'm sitting there reading books like this is that they do oftentimes you have to deal with the verbiage of it all in certain kinds of academic books, books in the field of academia, and analyzing various different types of things in our society. It's just another way to authenticate that this is something that is more than just having a regular conversation between other people. But I often feel kind of conflicted by it because sometimes when people are trying to, listen to it, or even when you're trying to read it, you're kind of like, dang, like this makes sense, but it doesn't. I don't know. And I've always hated that about certain things because it's like you got to step your pussy up and get your mind right, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, okay. The belief in black films, a dental tied to the black life foregoes a focus on nuance and octals occults the complexity of black film to interpret, render, incite, and speculate. This misrecognition corresponds to Edwin S. Porter's Uncle Josh at the Moving Picture Show, 1902, and the scenario of a rube who rushes the theater scene to protect his projected daughter's honor. In the context of this book's thesis, the title would be Uncle Josh at the Black Picture Show. This book thesis, the title that we're gonna, this book is about black film, or more precisely the idea of black film. Okay. And a rube is a country bumpkin. I found that out by looking at something else. I forgot what I was looking at. It was two black dudes looking at Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal was basically telling the main actress that she's a rube. He was reading her for filth, and they were both like, "What is a rube?" And that's what it is, a country bumpkin. I just wanted to say it. I argue that as art and discourse, black film operates as visual negotiation, if not tension, between film as art and race as a constitutive cultural fiction. Okay. I deliberately engender a shift to distinguish between the rendering of race in the arts from the social categories of race, and thus force tall, the collapsing of the distance between referent and representation. This shift disputes the fidelity considerations of black film. The presumptions that the primary function of this brand of American cinema entails an strategic tick. Oh my God, strategic tick. I hate words. Extrategic tick. Strategic? No, it's not strategic tick. Okay. Responsibility or capacity to embody the black life world or provide answers in the sense of social problem solving. Furthermore, the idea of black film cannot be tantamount to an ethics of positive and negative representation that insists on black film in the ethics of positive and negative in the terms of cultural policy, eminent category, genre, or mimetic corroboration of the black experience. Black film must be understood as arts, not prescription. This book does not insist on an aesthetic vision of pure cinema and art unsoiled by incidental or extraneous concerns for the cultural, social, and political. I'm not arguing for a de-radicalized or post-racial notion of black film. Okay. Film blackness means everything in black film and especially the questions we ask about this cinema. In particular, this repurposing insists that to outline the idea of black film as art entails addressing it as a practice that emanates from the conceptual field of black visual and expressive culture. Okay. This means that in addition to interdisciplinary collaboration with collateral questions that broach the art of blackness, I am framing the idea of black film in correspondence to literature, music, new media, photography, and contemporary art for a wider conception of blackness as the visualizing and creative production of knowledge that is one of the core values of the idea of black film. To be clear, instead of a book compelled by disinterest in the black life world, film blackness is compelled by disinterest in claiming that the black life world be the sole line of inquiry that can be made about the idea of black film. Okay. Very interesting. It seems like he's saying, okay, this is my paraphrasing of that, all of that. Basically, he's saying that he wants to extend the ideas of what black film is, and that black film needs to be something that goes beyond just having its worth based off of it being black. And that if we're going to talk about it being black, then there needs to be something there that actually seems interesting, that actually really takes you there, really questions the powers that be. That's just kind of how I see it, right, from what I'm looking at it. As an example of how film blackness might offer a more inclusive and variegated investment in the idea of black film, I turn to Harry Allen's Telling Time on Strike, and the Reality of Clockers. Not a review per se, but an extended observation on Spike Lee's Clockers 1995. Opening with an account of his wife sighing while watching the film, Allen reads her response as a sign of disbelief, which mirrored his own frustrations with the film. He also identifies a remark made by Ronald Strike Dunham, the film's protagonist, as emblematic of his overall impressions of Clockers. I ain't got the stomach no more for this shit. According to Allen, one of the film's irreversible flaws entails gaps in character motivation and logic that result in a film that appears alternatively real and contrived in ways that make you question the value or reality of what's real. While he pointed out how the film cheats, Allen did recognize Lee's auteurist liberties and the burden of representation. Any filmmaker can use any filmic strategy to make a point as long as that strategy is coherent. And black filmmakers are burdened with the rope chain of reality in ways white people simply aren't. Interesting. Though remaining fixed on what he considers the film's duplicitous quality, Allen notes that an additional shortcoming of Clockers is its failure to be challenging enough mystery for the spectators trying to solve the question of who killed Daryl Adams. Yet this overture to a formal standard of mystery and noir detection is disingenuous, as the core thrust of Allen's contention with the film is founded on veracity claims about black film. Okay. An adaptation of Richard Price's novel of the same name, 1992, Clockers, consequentially differs from the novel's primary focalization through homicide detective Rocco Klein, with a shift to a narrative emphasized on strike that amplifies the character's depth. Aesthetically speaking, the film's color reversal film stock remediates the light and shadow play of noir with a color palette of vivid grains that ominously evoke surveilling reportage. Significantly, the film's mystery of who killed Dara Adams in truth suggests a narrative conceit of why Strike must be the killer, thus echoing the premise of Nicholas Ray's In a Lonely Place, 1950, and the question of why Dixon Stale Humphrey Bogart must be the killer rather than who killed the hatch check girl. Clockers complicates noir form with an attention to black visuality, popular culture, and the narrativization of criminality. In other words, Strike must be the killer according to anti-black codes of criminality and not strictly by the procedural science of murder investigation and nor justice. Oh, okay. And Strike must be the killer according to anti-black codes of criminality and interesting. Regardless, the rest of Allen's article is devoted to comments from an assembled roundtable of experts, three people identified as intimately knowledgeable about the film's subject matter, with the implication that they are capable of speaking with the authority on the film. Ace, a self-described on and off drug dealer, Louise Aurora, police officer, and John Hatcher, EMT, emergency medical technician. Each responded to the film through the analytical filter of his occupational and personal experience as a way of measuring the credibility of various details, but most especially in terms of the characters and their actions. Noting the actions of film characters against his own drug dealing experiences, Ace stated that much of Clockers was believable, but he pointed out that Clockers was not a term used in the drug trade. Okay. Officer Aurora found much that was realistic about the film, but said the design of the interview room and the procedural behavior of the officers, their use of racist speech, and their brutality were unrealistic. Interesting. The EMT found the morbid comic behavior of detectives at the crime scene realistic, but the montage of staged gunshot victims in the title sequence was too graphic and bordered on fake. He conceded that the photographs might be staged or that perhaps he had just become hardened to such images. Each respondent's final question was your weapon of choice. None was asked whether he knew that Clockers was a fiction film, yet their responses suggest they believe it was a nonfiction, a mere reflection of truth. Okay. That's interesting. My intention in offering this antidote is not to scold Harry Allen and the respondents for making extraordinarily wrong claims that are endemic of a fringe opinion, a view that black film be primarily measured by experiential truth or authenticity claims. Rather, my intention is to illustrate something ordinary and common, the notion that a certifiably good or bad black film must be a matter of what one would credibly expect to experience in one's life. Or in other words, the black film must correspond to reality itself. Okay? This logic operates with the presumption that the fundamental value of a black film is exclusively measured by a consensual truth of film's capacity to wholly account for the lived experience or social life of race. Interesting. Rather than merely dismiss the indicical, okay, expectation with a asocial or atemporal persuasion, this book promotes contextual and relational tendencies of the idea of black film. In the end, black film does not prosper as a diagnostic mission. Okay. I briefly offered a few possible ways of approaching Clockers that address form and style, genre, aesthetics and materiality, stock, affinity, intertextuality, and narrative, the conceit of a problem, crime, and solution. These offerings do not exhaust all of the probable considerations of Clockers, but they are as vital and more immediately significant than veracity critiques. Moreover, as Clockers is indeed a film invested in commentating on issues of the drug trade, inner city violence, black villainy, and black respectability, the real issue is that the film can be fully appreciated only as an acting the art of cinema and a social critique. Thus, to ignore the former for the sake of the latter, or to deny that the latter is mediated by the former denotes incomplete and imperfect criticism. Film Blackness suspends the idea of black film by pushing for a more expansive understanding of blackness in cinema. What do we mean when we say black film? Black directors, actors, or content. Charles Burnett, not Jim Jarmusch. Within Our Gates, Oscar Mycox, 1920. Love Oscar Mycox. He was the first director to ever be noted, right? Love his work. He was based in Illinois, I believe. Not George Washington, David Gordon Green, 2000. Is Soul Plane, Jesse Terrell, 2004. More black than Ganja and Hess, Bill Gunn, 1973. What does the designation black film promise, and what does it disallow? Film blackness is a resolve to a react reaction re I don't know, reaction to it. Gosh, I don't know. Reactionate. I had never seen this word a day in my life. To reaccentuate. I think that's how you say it. The values attributed to black film and generated by abounding confluence of the art of cinema and black discursivity, right? If we don't know a word, we just got to keep reading, honey. Repeat. That's what I tell my little sister all the time. You just got to repeat, right? Um, I think that's interesting, the critiques about how he sees black film and about how he's saying that. I think what really stuck with me is how he said black film is only valuable by how um, it has to be perfectly aligned with how race works in the real world. I think what I'm noticing is that he's saying that there is no room for fiction, there is no room for interpretation. It has to be fully solidified in the things that happen now, which maybe he's saying is limiting to the existence of how black people um, are shown in film. And that's just an interpretation. Everybody has their interpretation of what he's saying, right? Um, which is very interesting considering how a lot of black people have been saying they want more black fantasy films. They want more black films that are not fully bound by these rigid ideas of blackness, but they do want it to be predominantly black. So they want it to be black, but they don't want it to be black in terms of everything being negative, everything being something that is fully based in blackness being a connotation to something that is destructive or bad, or something that is worse off in society. Again, that's just my interpretation. I don't know. I think everybody kind of has their own ways of looking at it, but I do find it interesting. Film, okay, is it all over my face? Film blackness demands more ambition for the idea of black film as a critical capacity and not a gentle authority. What if black film could be something other than embody? What if black film was immaterial and bodiless? What if black film could be speculative or ambivalent? What if film is ultimately the worst window imaginable and even poor mirror? What if black film is art or creative interpretation and not merely the visual transcription of the black life world? Interesting. As Ralph Ellison wrote in response to Stanley Eggers Hyman's analysis of black folklore in Ellison's Invisible Man, 1952, I use folklore in my work not because I am a Negro, but because writers like Eliot and Joyce, made me conscious of the literary value of my folk inheritance. I knew the trickster's Ulysses just as early as I know the Willie Rabbit of Negro American lore. Ellison exposes the violation of a critique's good intentions as an anti-intellectual engagement with the artist's choice of form and style that reduces the intertextual reserve of his work to solely the black life world. The trickster is part, not parcel. Okay, that's what's going on. Okay. It's saying that blackness is often limiting in the way that we are able to express our stories, and how because of the way blackness was constructed in our society, every time we create something, maybe that black identity is not something that makes it that validates the art form. So now I understand why it's called film blackness instead of saying black film, because if you call it film blackness, then that is validating the fact that it is an art form beyond having to sit there and say that this is something that is only valuable by the fact that it is racialized, because white people do not have to do that. And I've said that before. I said that with racial programming, that through how we see ourselves, that white people are not bound by certain stereotypes. Now, you can't have like the country bumpkin the rube, you can't have all of these other different things, but they are not bound by the racial classification, and so they can be anything they want to be, right? We can have plenty of vampire movies. That's the reason why Haley Steinfeld, and of course Haley Steinfeld had a bigger following and was known more than the other actresses, but That's the reason why you could sit there and look at Sinners and look at Haley Steinfeld and focus on her. Not only because they're making sure that she's part of the marketing, but the reason that she's being part of the marketing is because um, there has been years upon years upon years upon years of imagery of vampires being solely white, right? There has been years, I make horror art all the time. There's been years upon years upon years upon years upon years of imagery in the horror genre that has been white. The final girl is white. Other people are white. And so when you introduce blackness into a very specific kind of genre, it changes things, right? Because it's like, oh, it's woke, oh, it's this. And even when we go back to a time where things were more progressive or more liberal, there is still this thing that I think may happen where people are noticing that blackness, because under white supremacy, you have to notice blackness because it is the exact opposite, right? Right. It is the other side of the spectrum. So I believe that's what he's saying. He's saying that that particular type of identity of blackness creates something in the way we see film and the way we see our stories that takes away a lot of what we that takes away the ability for us to authenticate our stuff as art, which is true. If you go into art spaces, you go into various other different types of things, the way that they only focus on black artists based off the blackness, it's very like, how can we focus on you as an artist beyond the fact that you are a black artist from the hood, or maybe even a black artist talking about colonialism and colonization from, let's say, from different parts of Africa, or talking about all of these other different things. Even other people of color have to do that, right? Because that authenticates you as an art, right? As an artist, that authenticates, that makes people at these certain institutions that are run by liberal white people, it makes them feel better about themselves, because it's like, look, we are kind of making up for the different things our ancestors did. We're making up for some of the different issues that we had, and it makes me think, because I remember looking at something on YouTube about the Harlem Renaissance, and how, though we had so many different things going on in Harlem Renaissance, there was still some issues with the liberal white people that were giving these black people opportunities, because it was like, you still should be grateful that I'm allowing you to get this opportunity as a black person. You still should be grateful that I'm allowing you to have a seat at the table as a black person, and giving you the opportunity to show your paintings at at this gallery, and giving you the opportunity to be an extra on this film of predominantly white people. Like, it's stuff like that that even the liberal white people still pat themselves on the back, and it was like, but you're not really you're not really doing what you think you're doing. Like, I don't know. Blackness in this book functions as a term for, hold on, y'all, I'll be right back. 2, 3, 1. Okay. Can y'all still see me? Am I still here? The viewers can't hear you because, wait, the viewers can't hear me? Wait, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? I don't know. Blackness in this book functions as a term for art modalities that invents black visual and expressive culture. Film Blackness particularly focused on a questions of intertextual consequence, visuality, performativity, cultural history, and the politics of cinematic form. Thus, Blackness functions as an interpretive and creative process that bears out what Kimberly Benston recognizes as the enduring lesson of black cultural nationalism. Blackness is not an inevitable object, but rather a motivated, constructed, corrosive, and productive process. Interesting. Therefore, Film Blackness donates a reading practice devoted to the cinematic, the visual production of blackness, black visuality, and the critical ways that art disrupts, distends, and inspires. This multi-discursive property of blackness signals the interpretive and performative capacity of the art of blackness as an aesthetic, cultural, and political engineering of craft. Race as a constitutive cultural fiction has always been a consequential element of American history and social life, and anti-black racism, white supremacy, and the racial contract are foundational and systematic features of American life. Let me read that one more time. Race as a constitutive cultural fiction has always been a consequential element of American history and social life. And anti black racism, white supremacy, and the racial contract are foundational and systematic features of American life. This resonates with the way the idea of race becomes endangered. They can't hear me, bitch. That is so annoying. I like, okay. Let me just keep going. This resonates with the way the idea of race becomes engendered as a national phenomenon. As Wahim Lubinano observes, what is race in the United States if not an attempt to make real a set of social assumptions about biology? So then, in spite of the way race functioned as a constitutive and cultural fiction, once it appears on the screen, how could it be anything other than social fact, the way people are raised? The misunderstanding of art enables a critical negligence and wish fulfillment that leaves black film as fruit from the poison tree, or the idea of race as quantifiable, fantastically whole. This book insists that black film matters because it offers a critical range of potentialities for understanding blackness as a multi-essential and multidisciplinary. Film Blackness renews the idea of black film as a highly variable and unfinalizable braiding of art, culture, and history. There is a rigorous pleasure and politics to this strategy that requires a consideration of what desires inform our conceptions of black visuality and the need to distinguish this pleasure from the dilemma of anti-black racism. This requires engaging with the film as art on the limit of anti-black racism. This requires engaging with the film as art on the grounds of what it does and as oppressed to what it has been recursively predetermined to do as the black experience. Interesting. The decursivity of black demands greater rigor than speculations of universal blackness. Stuart Hall recognizes that race as a cultural phenomenon cannot be simplified for the sake of maintaining the semblance of a stable racial category, for this would simply hold on. For the sake of maintaining the semblance of a stable racial category, for this would simply reiterate the existential matter of anti-black racism. In the context of my books, focus on the idea of black film, Hall's rhetorical query of black popular culture echoes my emphasis on a critical investment that does not hinge on guarantees of a universal black subjectivity or spectatorship. Thus, film Blackness and its deliberate lack of a totalizing correspondence to a natural order of things or transcendental racial categories prefers a regard for discursivity instead of enduring claims of political and cultural obligations. The cultural cadence of film Blackness is attuned to the critical dialogism of cinema as an enactment of black visual and expressive culture. The term itself is meant to demonstrate a methodological prerogative to incite a disrepent engagement with the idea of black film. Thus, the concept of film Blackness targets the ideas of black film with a motivation concentrated on aesthetic, historiographic, and historiographic, and cultural consequence. With this agitated and churning independency of blackness, form, content, and the spatio-temporal magnitude of cinema in mind, this book contests hypostatic and canonical ideas of black film by complicating the conditional questions of classifying black film and its social applicability or place in the social world. The vast modalities of black art, of which cinema is a part, often suffer the analytic impropriety of marginalities, selective blindness, and indifference to the discursive of race and blackness as potentiality. Film Blackness insists on a redrawing of the lines of influence, appreciation, allusion, casualty, reference, and exposition. The disparate engagement of this book calls attention to a cinema's capacity to pose distractions and decision in the place of diagnostic ceilings or the false intimacy of doing black film a favor by denying that it is a rigorous and flourishing art. Okay. Nicole Fleetwood vitally considers the always already overdetermined nature of blackness in the visual field as its troubling effect. She argues that this is troubling is endemic to the process of visualizing black bodies. Her work is important for the thesis because of how she frames the objects of her analysis as providing a lens to look at the effective power of black culture, production, or the calling upon the spectator to do certain work to perform a function or arbiter or decoder of visual signs that become aligned with blackness. Film blackness demands a certain work of spectator, critical, or otherwise to revalue black film with active labor of reading through and across blackness by treating each enactment of black film as discrete, if not ambivalent. The Sum of Us. Black film does not and cannot satisfy in deterioration fantasies of black ontology. Instead, it poses conceits, specificities, and context. Film blackness persistently wrestles with the question of identity as something other than a fixed signifier. As Robin Wigman notes, if identities are not metaphysical, timeless categories of being, if they point not to the ontologies but to historical specificities and contingencies, if their mappings of body and subjectivities are forms of and not simply resistance to practice of domination, then a politics based on identity must carefully negotiate the risk of reinscribing the logic of the system in hopes to defeat. Oh, okay. This is interesting. If rethinking the historical contours of Western racial discourse matters as a political project, it is not a manifestation of another truth that has previously been denied, but as a vehicle for shifting the frame of reference in such a way that the present can emerge as somehow less familiar, less natural in its categories, its political delineations, and epistemological foundations. Interesting. I don't know. Are they? I guess I'm so, because it's starting to get to a certain point where it's saying that you cannot, like, questioning the ideas of having black American identity be a part of film and somehow saying that blackness and American identity cannot exist in itself as an art form. It cannot exist in itself as something that works within that particular type of art form, simply due to the fact that if we are not too careful, we can slip and end up uh, basically aligning ourselves with white supremacy, aligning ourselves with the ideas of what it means to be a white person or something like that, right? Or a white supremacist or a racist or a white nationalist. And that kind of annoys me because it's like seeing kind of the ideas of how people talk about, black Americana. A lot of black people, black Americans, they get talked about for identifying with the Americana, identifying with the American look in their art. And oftentimes it's seen as a way of ruining the true idea of black art. It is seen as giving into white supremacy and sort of being a conduit for things that are supposed to be against the black community, things that are supposed to be putting black people down, and basically being a unaware coon. Like, you're cooning, but you're not aware of your cooning. Or maybe you are aware of your cooning, but you're selling out and then trying to package it as something that is uplifting black people in America. But you can never be uplifting your art as a black person in America without that being something to think about. And I think part of that is something to, like, part of that is, I think part of that is like, valid to question. However, another part of that, I'm just like, mm. I don't think it's just as simple because as sitting there trying to rechange or reshape fully the black art that's made in America, in the West, right? I don't think it's that simple to make that shift. I don't think it ever will be. Um, in the corner of black film, Wigman's observations illustrate the tangential. I like tangential, but tangential misunderstandings that enfeeble and excessively task the idea of black film. This is most evident in the ways that film Blackness denaturalizes the authority of categorical claims by fixating on the contextual composition of the idea of black film. To demonstrate this, I turn to a film that disables the black identitarian essence impulse through a compounding of racial, gendered, and performative scripts. Interesting. An experimental short. Lee Gillums, I hate names, Now Pretend, 1992, juxtaposes personal memoirs of black subject formation to John Howard Griffin's Black Like Me, 1961. An account of his 1959 transformation and passing as a black man in the South. The modernist design of the film is structured by disclinations and slippages with regards to personhood and black being. Instead of binaristic conceptions of being, the film poses a series of abstracted visualizations of blackness. It demonstrates an ambivalence towards veracity, claims, and identitarian prescription. The film opens with a shot of a shadow being cast on the sidewalk and pans up to reveal the back of a black woman walking, awash in the sounds of children playing. The kinetic handheld shots are in slow motion as the lighting casts her as a moving silhouette. Then, with a cut to a black woman reading Black Like Me, the soundtrack features a reading of Griffin's account of an exchange with his doctor following completion of the final chemical treatment. As he leaves, his doctor says, "Now you go into oblivion." The film cuts to a shot of an unknown figure walking in the evening through a field while carrying a flashlight that offers the only illumination. The figure's movement in the darkness and the light cuts to a black woman holding a mirror with the film's title within the frame. With a return to the kinetics of the opening scene, the audio track shifts to a black mother talking of the effect of black consciousness on her sense of identity, while a voice slowed and the accelerated whispers "skin black," and a mother speaks of how letting her hair go natural became a confirmation of newness. Gilliam orchestrates a braiding of blackness scripts in the sense of identitarian speculation. The Lacanian mirror stage embody masquerade cultural standards of beauty, diasporic negotiation, and black femininity. In another poignant sequence from the film, a black woman walks through a park while carrying a ribbon. The text on the ribbon reads, "At what point did you realize the politics of your self-difference?" The auto track returns to the mother reflecting on the politics that informed her parenting. "I wanted you to be a part of the larger world, but one in which you could keep your personal identity in a way that I felt had not been able to do with the white institutions in which I had to work and study." The mother's commentary shifts to her memory of the cultural politics of hair and her eventual decision to stop processing her hair. This account is accompanied by a montage that includes an unidentified black woman on a city street, two black girls wearing pillowcases on her head to stimulate long hair, ribbons laid over telephone wires fluttering the wind. The scene from Imitation of Life, Douglas Sirk, 1959, when Sarah John tosses a black doll, and a reenactment of the moment that followed the earlier sighting of Black Like Me, when Griffin had returned home to shave his head and apply the final treatment of stain to his skin. In the flood of light against white tile, the face and shoulders of a stranger. A fierce, bald, very dark Negro glared at me from the glass. He in no way resembled me. The transformation was total and shocking. I expected to see myself disguised, but this was something else. All traces of the John Griffin I had been were wiped from existence. Intercutting shots of a black woman looking into a mirror that alternately features the words identity and reflect. The film is further complicated by another reflection on the audio track of a woman recounting her experience of learning to speak properly and convincingly black, and a contradiction to the pidgin spoken by her Trinidadian parents and the sounding white accusations of her peers. Interesting. The film manifests an everyday abstraction of blackness as unsustainable in the strict terms of identitarian being. Through a multiplicity of voices and with references to cinema, psychoanalysis, and the autobiographical voice, the film proffers and parallels multiple antagonisms surrounding the notion of black identity as something finite or finite, something to which all might universally subscribe. Instead, the film's avant-garde swagger compounds and plots blackness as the art of being, historiography, cultural engineering. In the place of reinscribing categories, the narrator's voice articulates self consciousness and the a gentle skill of recognizing the danger and accepting scripts from strangers. That's really good. That's cool. Some scholars evade the complication of black film by pursuing a critical line that advocates for ethical judgments about film in a manner that suggests it dicks on cultural policy. Okay, this type of criticism, anathema to the prerogative of the artist, insists on good black film along the tactic rhetorical lines of good black film. Now pretend conceptualizes the lived experiences of race in the necessary terms of complication and irresolution. The film's critical posture amply dissuades the impulse to wholly distill the cinematic apparatus to a reflectionist ideal. And redefine black film, Mark Reed attempts to remedy those issues that he believes deeply plague the writing of black film history and the reading of black film. He stresses that distinctions must be made between commercial film and those black independent films. Okay. Written, directed, produced, and distributed by individuals who have some ancestral link to black Africa, and cautions against critical analysis that avoid serious historical issues and ignore the phonic forms of black subjectivity. He prefaces his remedy in the following way. Film histories that fail to distinguish black commercial films from black independent films tend to focus entirely on the commercial films. Consequently, they bury black film history by analyzing it according to relevant theoretical criteria that are not applicable to black independent films. They also do not consider the particular cultural experience of African Americans. Interesting. Other well-meaning critics analyze black-oriented films according to the popular Marxist, feminist, and psychoanalytical approaches that appeal to the wide-set reading audiences, white, male, and female middle-class intellectuals. Ooh. What did I say? What did I say? Yeah. They're not going to fully dive into that. It's not going to fully be accepted because, yeah, you need to make sure that they are comfortable. Because we already see that there's a portion of white America that is feeling like they are, being taken out. There is a white genocide. Whiteness is no more. Whiteness is done. It's over for you. No more white, right? And it gets to a certain point where it's like, I don't really know if there will ever be a moment where all of white America, right? You can't get all of one group anyway to believe in one thing. This is not how it works. But a good amount of white America will want to see something that fully goes beyond themselves. A lot of film has always been catered to them. A lot of the racial programming has always been in accordance with making sure that whiteness is the default. And so there would never ever be a reality where you would not have to grapple with that in some form or fashion. That is just something that is foundational to cinema itself. It wasn't that we didn't have black people at the beginning of cinema. We've always had black people at the beginning of cinema. One of the first things that was ever recorded, what is said to be one of the first ever filmed things is a black man on a horse, right? And that's something else entirely. That's so interesting, especially when they were sitting there talking about the cultural aspects and the full extent of what it means to be African American, because so much of the country attitude, so much of the country identity has been made into whiteness, and there's a whole history of black people who are country. There's a whole history of black people who have whole roots in the ideas of country and southern living, but here we are, right? And so it's very interesting reading that to say that, yes, that's something that will always have to be. You will have to think about that when analyzing black film. There is this issue that there are certain people in certain groups, that make up most of the society or a good amount of the society that are away from those certain aspects. And when marketing films to be something interesting, it's the same way people are sitting there talking about Sinners. And they say it's not just a horror film, which I think is debatable. I mean, you can really say it's not just a horror film, but that's not even really the problem. The problem is it was supposed to just be a horror film. It was supposed to just be something to scare people, but it had too much other stuff going on into it. Had too many other different things that it was talking about, that it made a lot of people interested in it. A lot of people liked the film, but at the same time, there was also a good amount of people that were sitting there trying to downplay the film, because anytime you have somebody who uplifts a film too much, there's going to be a contrarian. Oh my gosh, there's going to be a contrarian that's going to be like, oh well, that's not really a good film, and I feel like it was all right, y'all doing too much, and bada bing bada boom. It's always going to be something. But I do feel that that is something, as a black artist, as a filmmaker, even with the success of black filmmakers, when you try to make that transition from something that is just commercial, something that is just marketable in that sense, and you try to make it something that goes beyond that, you try to make it something that goes beyond this need to be specifically just, okay, look y'all, we're black, we black up in the hood, we black up in the we out here, boom boom, shot, we trying to make it, we trying to survive. When you try to go and you try to do something avant-garde, being in art spaces, right? When you try to do something that goes beyond just the stereotypical ideas of blackness, and you try to reshape it, even when you do have something that's stereotypical, you try to reshape it, the only people that are allowed to do that and have success are white people. That's it. And so black people will constantly be questioned, because as we try to progress in society, you're going to need more and more people to support not only the commercial successes, but the avant-garde successes, or better yet, the ones that are able to do both. And that's one thing that I love about Sinners, is that it's not necessarily the most experimental. There's more experimental films if you've seen them, but it is definitely on the experimental side. It is a multi-genre film that is somehow also commercially successful. And that really rubs people the wrong way. Not just the studios that were saying you're not going to be able to make it. And then Ryan Coogler was sitting there telling Warner Brothers, hey, for 3 years, can I please get this finance? Can I please get this finance? And they said, we're going to let you do it, but you're going to have to do it with your own damn money. And when it tanks, you're going to have to pay us back. Eventually, he did the film. It became a big hit. Now, all of a sudden, they're sitting there taking credit for being like, oh, so we always knew it, but they never know. And so we have so many different types of films with a bunch of actors. And yes, you have black actors and other stuff like that. But you have so many different kinds of films that focus solely on white people, or show majority white people. And it's a shitty film, right? Very bad. But people will still tune in because it's like, well, white. It has white people in it. And so black people are not allowed to fuck up. Black people are not allowed to mess up. They're not allowed to sit there and have mistakes. We're not allowed to have the full spectrum of films. And that's why I always compare it to white and black. Not sitting there saying white people are just the best thing ever, but because we are not allowed to have the full spectrum. White people, they can sit there and have a bad film. They can have an avant-garde film. Or they can have a commercial film, right? They can have a film that is fully just, a mix of both. They can have a film on streaming. They can have a film in the theaters. They can have an award-winning film. They can have a film that's a cult classic, especially cult classic films. When we're talking about people like, I don't know if any of y'all know David Lynch. When we're talking about people that are doing things that are like experimental, getting away with certain stuff that is considered nonsensical. I call it beautiful nonsense, that kind of genre of film. Black people, it's harder to get into that particular category. And I can sit there and extend that not only to the visual medium that is film, I could extend that to music in itself. Being alternative, being indie, being somebody who does whisper singing, being somebody that does rock, being somebody that does metal. We've always had people that have done that. At the beginning of the art form, we've always had black people who've done that. I've seen films constantly, right? Before Spike Lee, after Spike Lee, Lee Daniels, Tyler Perry, it has always been in existence: censorship, racism, white supremacy. And so that maintains the ability of saying, we're not going to fully allow you to get that far. Right? You can get lucky once, but we can't constantly allow you to fully have the spectrum, because minorities do not fully have the ability to exist in every single aspect of themselves. That's why if you have somebody who's black and they're in the media and it's like Sexy Red, right? Or somebody else, that is a representation of all of us. However, that's not fair, because how are we going to sit there and negotiate and regulate everybody in the black community to make sure that we are presentable enough to be able to be given opportunities, to be able to have the full extent or the full ability to be able to show our art? That's that's just it's laughable at that point. But anyway, Reed insists that black film must be considered a practice tied to black subject formation that requires historical contextualization and a guided attentiveness to polyphony. Polyphony. Oh my gosh, polyphony. I hate words like this. I think it's polyphony. Polyphony? I'm going to keep saying it like that. His thesis becomes troublesome with the absence of any real necessity to distinguish between the mainstream and the commercial, other than to emphasize the importance of black means of production, as if for us, by us. It's beyond reproach. Whatever Reed may intend in celebrating black people in black film becomes a treatise in the tactic terms of the good black film as the good black. To pose film as black cultural production must avoid a conditionally narrow sense of purposefulness. To do so in a Marxist, feminist, and psychoanalytic way does not constitute accessing critical analysis as an exercise in white privilege. You cannot claim to read films oh my god, dialogically. Oh my gosh. You cannot claim to read films dialogically and then refuse to see what the films are doing. How can you be willing to appreciate black film or film blackness when it is predetermined by such a prescriptive prerogative? Does any good really come from refusing to let art exceed your expectations? Reed rightly raises the issue of a necessary rigor for the study of black film, but then quickly states that it is inappropriate to pursue that relevant trajectory because it does not subscribe to the essential valorization for us by us. He writes, critics and historians must analyze the independent film in the terms of the filmmaker's efforts to create films that explore serious social issues and present balanced images of black women. Yes. Let's read that again. In terms of the filmmaker's efforts to create films that explore serious social issues and present balanced images of black women, men, and African American community. And I'm glad they started off with black women, because colorism in cinema is unfortunately at the root of cinema. It is at the root of cinema. And when you really notice colorism, and when you really look at what I call the racial programming of it all, you're like, oh my God. This is the reason why people are sitting there looking at Annie and Sinners and being like, I don't get it. It don't make sense to me. That don't work. That's not real. In developing such a cultural, ideological, socio-economic analysis of black film, critics and historians must describe how, but what means, and to what extent black independent filmmakers have chosen to be responsive to the needs of the black community. This ultimately does a disservice to black people by suggesting that if there is some essence to be found, it is appropriate to think that the film is the proper vessel for such a covenant. Being responsive to the needs of the black community does not mean you have to patronize this monolithic black community. Black films offers a vast array of possibilities for conceiving race in creative terms, and film Blackness follows through on that promise without devaluing a life world and over-evaluating an art. Okay. Film Blackness restages the conceptual casting of blackness as equal parts thought, lane, aesthetic, and inheritance. That is not a simple or exact matter, nor should it be. Reed's analysis may have been conceived almost 25 years ago, but the tendency to equivocate about the idea of black film with reference to a... Oh my God, what's this? Select two objects that are the same. Select two hearts to the same shape. I hate when it does this. The same shape. Those are the same shape. Okay. Surely. What? Those are the same shape. Come on now. Thank you. I hate when they do that. Now I done lost my, because it wants me to confirm my spot. So annoying. Okay, it needs no. This ultimately does a disservice to black people by suggesting that if there is some essence to be found, it is appropriate to think that the film is a proper vessel for such a covenant. Being responsive to the needs of the black community does not mean you have to patronize this monolithic black community. Black films offer a vast array of possibilities for conceiving race in creative terms, and film Blackness follows through on that promise without devaluing a life world and overvaluating an art. Film Blackness restages the conceptual casting of blackness as equal parts thought, Elaine, aesthetic, and inheritance. That is not a simple or exact matter, nor should it be. Reed's analysis may have been conceived almost 25 years ago, but the tendency to equivocate about the idea of black film with reference to a singular and fantastic black community are dampening readings devoted to black spectatorial spectatorial, oh my gosh, prescriptions and perpetuating some notion of cinema's capacity to project black authenticity persist. If we must see ourselves, then let it be in mirrors and not on screens. Wow. Darby's English importantly considers black representational space, the institutional, academic, and cultural tendencies to scrutinize black art in such a way that can only be thought of as the effect of politics representation, raging ever since blackness could be proposed as the starting point of a certain mode or type of artistic depiction. And how to see a work of art in total darkness, English considers how the category of black art requires a practical transformation that ultimately bears out the most difficult truth that the category black art is now exposed as one among those many identity frameworks painstakingly constructed for use in a time whose urgencies are simply not those of our own. In the context of American cinema, film Blackness recognizes this urgency, but also understands that framing black film with an avert longing for a black truth benefits neither the art nor black people. What harm is there in watching film as an invitation to think and be challenged rather than a pre-functionary autopsy? Okay, so what is the issue in looking at black film and being shocked and allowing it to, I guess, shock you or interest you, or allowing it to be something beyond its only worth being that it is a black film? Its only introduction and its only power being that, look, this film is for you because it's black. Not this film is for you because it just so happens to be predominantly black cast, but it is showing something that not only resonates with you, but resonates with other people in other communities. You know, solidifying it as not something that is solely built for us, by us, but is something that just so happens to be by us, but is solidified fully as what art is supposed to be solidified as, something that is meant to be recognized by people all around the world, by multiple different communities in multiple different countries, right? And so it is this questioning of what gives, you know, black art its power, what gives black art its understanding. You don't fully want to dilute the importance of being a black American and the black American identity and the black American and even black people in Africa and other aspects of blackness. I'll even say that as an FBA, controversial, but you don't want that to be diluted, right? Because even Ryan Coogler sat there and showed aspects of, you know, African roots in his film, because that's just being truthful to what that is. Me being a black American, I would never sit there and just fully look down on that or say that's just not true, because that is really true on how that worked out. But I do find that interesting. I recognize the ideological hazards the English identifies as placing a cap on the creative and critical volition of art. Instead of substituting one grand theory with another, I am arguing for approaches that can account for resistance, capacities, and variables. Black film does not represent a closed hermeneutics. goodness. They're teaching me new words. Hermeneutics. It represents a vast abundance. Hermeneutics. Wow, these words. Black rhythm happening. Blackness is always a disruptive surprise, moving in the rich knownfulness of every term it modifies. Such mediation suspends neither the question of identity nor the question of essence. Rather, blackness in its irreducible, right? Irreducible relation to the structuring forces of radicalism and the graphic montagic configurations of tradition, and perhaps most importantly, in its very manifestations and the inscriptional events of a set performances, requires another thinking of identity and essence. Interesting. The reprioritizing function of film Blackness, a multi-essential devotion to cinema and blackness, purposefully thrives on the searing and the inscriptional capacity of blackness noted by Fred Moulton. The improvisational, oh my gosh, eminence of blackness guides my conception of film Blackness to enliven and amend the idea of black film as an always disruptive surprise that might pose new this flag on me paradigms for genre, narrative aesthetics, historiography, and intertextuality. Film Blackness thickens with the irreducible character of blackness and the radical capacity of black visual and the expressive cultural indifference that ceaselessly devises and recasts. Arthur Javas' Dreams Are Colder Than Death, 2013, richly demonstrates this sense of cinema's capacity to enact black visual and expressive magnitude. And experimental documentary Dreams focuses on the meaning of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech 50 years later and whether the goals and ambitions of the civil rights movement has been achieved. The film asks, does the dream live on, and if so, what has changed? The Curie centers on a sustained and precedent consideration of what blackness is, what the history of blackness is, and what the concept means to black people today. During the film's opening sequence, there is a reverse motion shot of young black men appearing to fly backward from a public swimming pool. A sign of desegregation rolling back. Oh, no, it was a question. A sign of desegregation rolling back. In the midst of gymnastics of black bodies cast from water, Hortense Spiller's voice comes on the soundtrack. I know we are going to lose this gift of black culture unless we are careful. This gift that is given to people who didn't have a prayer. Here, I know, is answered by Dr. King saying I have a dream on the soundtrack, as her comments are ghosted by this I have a dream speech. In this prelude to the title sequence and the introduction of the film's premise, there is the distance between a gift in peril and prophecy. The film immediately signals departure from a static brand of documentary practice devoted to only the summation of historical detail. Instead, the film intones a contemplative measure of the past, present, and future. It is an essay film in the sense of nonfiction form of intellectual and artistic innovation whose black stream of consciousness is prefaced by Spiller's concern for the state of black culture. The film employs varying speed to accentuate and amplify gestures and movements through and across time and ideas. Furthermore, the film offers an almost ceaseless montage of images that include black vernacular photography, contemporary art, galactic locations, dance, and news photography. Aesthetically, the film frames its subjects in repose or moving as their commentary occurs as a voiceover. They are never seen speaking. They are always contemplative subjects whose thoughts circulate around them. This formal discontinuity of sound and vision of or spoken word and the sight of a speech act gives the effect of a thought process in place of the staid voice of God narration. In one significant sequence, there is a radical sense of black political ventriloquism, as Fred Moulton formulates how a result of the anti-black codes of America, the black desire to be free operates as a conspiratorial, there we go, act of theft, a criminal action. Moulton's voice overlays a scene of the dancer's storyboard P performing his improvised choreography in the street, and thus there is a confluence of schemes, joyful, political, and performative. A visual historiography of Black thought. The film sees with a productively agnostic impression of the idea of Black history in progressive terms by considering the perception and conception of history in exquisitely visual and mosaic terms. Geographically speaking, the film is structured across the landscapes of Harlem, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Mississippi, and Los Angeles. The assembly of uncommon folk and specialists includes Spillers, Montan, Cara Walker, Charles Burnett, Melvin Gibbs, Sadia Hartman, Flying Lotus, Nicole Fleetwood, Kathleen Cleaver, Wangshi Mutu, and Black Cordonian Life. Together, this group of visual artists, revolutionaries, musicians, academics, filmmakers, activists, everyday citizens, and the guiding eye of Jafaf himself offer a history of critical resistance, philosophic practice, and Black expressivity. But I would like to briefly focus on part of Moulton's appearance. In the final section of the film, his voice is paired with the footage of him walking, and that is coupled with the footage from a Trayvon Martin rally in Los Angeles. The slow motion movement of a mass protest devoted to a Black boy coated by a hoodie, murdered, and left to die in the rain with no shelter from the storm became punctuated by Moulton's commentary that includes the following. When you say that Black people are just an effect of slavery, you raise the question, can Black people be loved? Not desired, not wanted, not acquired, not lusted after. Can Black people be loved? Can Blackness be loved? So what I am saying is that I believe there is such a thing as Blackness, and how it operates is that it is not an effect of horror. It survives horror and terror, but it's not an effect of these things. So it can be loved and has to be loved, and it should be defended. Oh my gosh, I live for that. That's what I've been saying. And this is something that I also think when I had sitting there and I saw a comment from one of my videos, my most recent videos, and it was me basically sitting there saying Black Americans have their own unique history, Black Americans have their own unique culture. And someone was basically sitting there saying that we should say that we are slaves of this particular type. I forgot the full nitty gritty of it, but we are slaves, descendants of America or something like that, right? Or West Africa, right? I think that's what they were saying. And it's very interesting when talking about slavery, because even in a lot of the different types of rants I've made, I've said, you know, we were once slaves. We were sold on the boats. We was once slaves. And I had to think about that when I did post those videos and I looked back at them. I said something about constantly reminding you that you were once a slave. You was on a boat. You were once a slave. Even when you are acknowledging the fact that you can be strong, that you can, you know, that you have been strong, your people have been strong, your ancestors had to be strong for you to be here. You do have to also think about the ability to be loved, to be nurtured, to be someone who can be at peace with Blackness. Blackness is not inherently something that is bound by survival. Blackness is not inherently something that is bound by trying to make it out of a horrible situation. And I really think about that in terms of like classism, being somebody middle class, talking to people who've been from the hood, having family who's been from the hood, but not being in the hood for myself. And how do you have these conversations about being somebody who's educated, not educated, being somebody who made it, who didn't make it, being somebody using your opportunity, not using your opportunity, just having like these in-house conversations within the Black community about who is worthy, about who is Black, right? That you are more authenticated in your Blackness by the fact that you struggle. You are more authenticated in your Blackness by the fact that you couldn't make it out of a particular situation. But so many other people around did not have that particular type of ability, right? Or better yet, they just weren't born in a situation that is fully ingrained in the ideas of Blackness, which is struggle, which is pain, which is a lack of and making it out of it. And so there, in the media in itself, right, when talking about people who are allowed to speak about Black struggle, I remember that I saw a video. His name is Little Bill, right? Some of you may know him. Little Bill, he kind of he's in the same realm with like FD Signifier, stuff like that, right? On that bread to black man liberal sphere on YouTube. And I remember he was sitting there making commentary on how it wasn't Issa Rae. I don't think it was Issa Rae, but Issa Rae also had this particular type of critique where he was talking about how there was people, I think it was Issa Rae, but there was people that were making something for Black people, just talking specifically about the Black struggle. However, they did not come from Black struggle, right? The creator of the Boondocks was not somebody who came from struggle. He grew up middle class, I think maybe even upper middle class, and he was somebody who was in a predominantly white community, right? And so he was not in any particular type of proximity of the people that he was depicting, or it wasn't some he wasn't in proximity so much so that it's like, oh, he grew up with them. He knows so much about what it means to be Black person from the hood, right? And so there was this questioning of, when he was making this satire, when he was making these critiques, though they are interesting, though they prove to be something that will always be cited as something that's influential in Black satire, in the critiques and the ideas of Black culture, there is this question about not being someone who's authentic in talking about your Black struggle. There is this question of not being somebody who understands the Black struggle good enough, right? And even with Issa Rae, they said that she was sitting there making one of them days that she didn't grow up in the hood. She grew up in the suburbs. Her parents was like a doctor, I think doctor, lawyer. They was like the big three, you know, engineering, doctor, lawyer. So they was in one of those fields. And you had so many other different things that she was making that was depicting people from a certain area, and people felt like she was kind of taking advantage of this particular type of thing. And she wasn't really somebody who had the right to. And I think that a lot of people, when talking about Blackness in itself, when talking about the ability to discuss Blackness, I do think that there is always this debate, even within the community, of who is Black, who isn't Black, based off of who is able to struggle the most. And in having those debates, no one's sitting there looking at who is able to be loved, who's able to be appreciated, who's able to be uplifted in something that is positive, and something that doesn't fully align itself with trauma. Even I struggle with this in my own work and a lot of different things that I do to commentate about Blackness in my art. It is just something that is hard to navigate, considering how, again, I've always said Blackness is so synonymous with struggle and pain and trauma. And so to really try to open it up and to see it as something that is worth loving, to see it as something that is worth nurturing, is something that Black people will always probably have an issue with or a struggle with in some form or capacity, right? His comments are made in the context of a consideration of Blackness and the object of Black studies, a commentary that is interspersed, oh my God, throughout the film. This love signifies a critical devotion to recognize Blackness in terms of other than the determinism of horrors. Can Blackness be love? Moulton suggests that Blackness is always ready, an act of faith with regard to the theological component of Black studies. Instead, this faith speaks to the potentialities of Blackness as the immateriality of faith shadows and moderates the effective force of Blackness. As an enactment of film Blackness, Dreams demonstrates the rigors of Black visual and expressive culture as a study of Black thought and Black performativity, a gathering and workshopping of ideas on Blackness as an act of non-institutionalized intellectual labor. The film pivots away from the narrative interrupted recycling of a selective remembered sense of Dr. King's vision to a dialogic envisioning of Black praxis and freedom. Dreams. Can Blackness be love? Moulton's questions, an exquisite explanation for dreams are colder than death, resounds as a rhetorical call, a devotional affirmation, an act of revolutionary hope. In its dynamic devotion to a practice of Black intellectual montage and multidimensional visualizing of Blackness, Jafar's enactment of film Blackness Amplified testifies to the idea of Black film as art and discourse. I examine the intimacies and intricacies of film Blackness not as and Unbroken Sweet, but as a variant case studies with distinct consequence and inventive designs that collectively defer those compulsions that delimit the idea of black film and the art of blackness. I focused on 4 American fiction films as distinct enactments of film blackness, with attention to considering each across critical traditions of blackness and the arts. I chose these films for the complication and the opportunity they pose for the idea of black film. Each proffers a distinct critical consequence, and my readings are focused on the conceptual multibility of film blackness as I locate each film within a particular discursive cluster that details how black film functions as radical art. Chapter 1, Reckless Eyeballing, focuses on Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin. Oh my god. I love Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin. If you guys really want to look at something that's interesting, something that's like just like really fun, experimental, crazy, funny, but like also allows you introspectiveness and like just allows you to think about like blackness. It was made by a white Jewish man now, so I don't know what they're gonna say, but he grew up in areas where he was with black people, Hispanic people, so he grew up in those areas, so he has a different type of mindset about it, right? And I remember when Coonskin came out, I did a little bit of research because I remember looking at it, trying to figure out what it was about, and a good amount of black people in the black community did not like Coonskin when it came out, right? A lot of people didn't like Ralph Bakshi stuff because I believe he was the first person to ever have an animated film that was an X-rated that hit the theater. But I remember the NAACP at the time, what I read, the NAACP was saying that this was actually a very smart critique of many different things. It was actually something that was supposed to be interesting in the way that we see blackness at the time, in the way that blackness was moving, and the different types of culture that was happening during the 1970s. And so that's kind of a little bit of history of Coonskin. But again, if you guys want to know more about that, you could just go to Ralph Bakshi's, you can look up Ralph Bakši's Coonskin. Addressing the film as an exercise in the racial grotesque, the film casts blackness as an absurd modality of critical dialogism, which, among other things, the history of American animation, the New South ideal, vernacular cosmopolitanism, the blaxploitation film cycle, the cultural imperialism of Disney, and the counterculture. Oh, hold on. Can we go back on that? The film casts blackness as an absurd modality of critical dialogism with, among other things, the history of American animation, the New South ideal, vernacular cosmopolitanism, oh God, the blaxploitation film cycle, the cultural imperialism of Disney. The cultural imperialism of Disney. Because let me tell you something about Disney. We like to think Disney is where they're at because of just how influential they are. There's no denying that. And they're trying to make up for the things that they've done in the past, being more cultured, being more, woke, as they say. But there is no denying that in their interpretations of various different things throughout history, that it is, very concerning. I can sit there and talk about The Princess and the Frog all day because what's going on with that? Even with that film that came out, I think 2020s, right? When the pandemic was first hitting, Soul. Even then, why did Jamie Foxx come back as a spirit and he went inside of a cat? Why are we still seeing black films where they had black people and black characters be a pet, an animal for most of the film, even if it makes sense in the plot, right? I hated that. And even one of the films that I loved the most growing up was Pocahontas. And Pocahontas, hearing about what actually happened, hearing about what actually took place, that was the worst film I ever seen in my life. I was like, I cannot believe I love this film. This film was trying to make light of that situation. They did so many things to that little indigenous girl. Grown ass men, colonizers, rapists, and pedophiles. I don't know. And the countercultural comics of the 1960s. The film performs a radical resinification and critique of the stereotype as commodity fetish, especially the continued naive and uncritical circulation of this iconography throughout mass media. Through a textual analysis devoted to one scene of Coonskin, I discussed the ideological texture of the film. Coonskin is a difficult film that challenges with the exaggeration and redirection of the cathartic intention of stereotypicality, right? Basically using stereotype, using caricatures, really expanding upon that to really dive deep into critiques of the various different issues that are going on with race. I'm just sitting there, rebuttaling or adding to the various different types of things in these particular types of readings. Like I said earlier when I was reading this, that a lot of these texts, I wouldn't really say unfortunately, no matter where you are, they have to use certain verbiage that makes sense within that particular field of study, within that particular type of thing in academia. It just is what it is. You go talk to somebody who does things in like philosophy, they have different verbiage they use. You talk to somebody, you have different books for learning about health, they have different things that they do. Everybody has different things that they do in order to make that make sense, and different words that they use, verbiage that they use, my bad, to make the different types of things that they are talking about make sense in that field of study. And so I just wanted to say that because I know you may be hearing it and you may be like, what does this mean? What does that mean? I'm right there with you. But I do get the gist of what I am reading. It's just something that has to be done in a lot of these different kinds of studies, right? Chapter 2, Smiling Faces, considers Wendell B. Harris Jr.'s Chameleon Street, 1989, and the ways the film stages racial passing in the key of racial performativity. The film's protagonist, Douglas Street, does not impersonate in the classical sense of racial passing pathologies. His passing as a performative act occurs as signifying menace, a threat to the categorical regimes of race and being. I also addressed Chameleon Street, especially in relation to the black film explosion of 1991. This involves reading the film's inability to gain favor critically or financially or as an independent film, art film, or black film by recontextualizing it within the historiography of 1991 as a sign of dispute with the popular and delimiting assessments of black film. Interesting. Chapter 3, Voices Inside, is an intervention in genre studies. With initial attention to the traditional considerations of noir and blackness, I built on James Naremore's discursive sense of the history of an idea and Manthia Diawara's Noirs by Noirs. Toward a reframing of noir, I considered Chester Hem's discrepant engagement with America in the language of the hard-boiled detective tradition and the black absurd. My textual analysis of Bill Duke's Deep Cover 1992 examines the dialogics of genre from noir and the discursivity of race blackness as modalities of noir blackness. Chapter 4. Black Maybe focuses on Barry Jenkins' Medicine for Melancholy, 2008. Exploring the film's quiet accounting of blackness, the city, and historiographic rupture in the age of neoliberalism. I argue that the film story of a black man and a black woman who couple for a day after a one-night stand is animated by issues such as melancholy, cosmopolitanism, love or desire or attachment, fantasy, gentrification, and the cultural geography of San Francisco. In this way, the film's narrativized tracking of this couple focuses on the shifting cultural and racial textures of that city. Thus, my dialectical reading of the film as fiction and chronicle considers the history of San Francisco as mediated by anxieties of black diasporic absence that are further imbricated by a romance conceit. In this instance of film Blackness, there is a complicated sense of how place impacts blackness in tandem with negotiations of futurity and the everyday. With a deeply contextual concern, film Blackness emphasizes how films are imbricated in a vital expanse of renderings, practices, and critical traditions devoted to blackness. The conceptual framing of film Blackness fundamentally upsides abides by this range for the sake of understanding that the idea of black film thrives as an enactment of black visual and expressive culture. This book is driven by the belief that the idea of black film is always a question, never an answer. All right, and here's some notes. There's like little different notes. So that's it. That is just wow, that was so fun, honestly. I enjoyed that. I really did. I'm so glad I was able to read this today. Even though it's not the full book. Again, this is Michael Boyce Gillespie, film Blackness, American Cinema, and the Idea of Black Film. Again, Michael Boyce Gillespie, film Blackness, American Cinema, and the Idea of Black Film. This was very interesting to look into, especially with, the way black film has been, having its moment. We're not necessarily in the 90s where it's like this big rise. I wouldn't say we're in the Harlem Renaissance, right? Where it's like this constant showing of blackness in cinema necessarily, right? We have more autonomy, we have more people in the industry who have the ability to make these projects, so we can't say it's like the Harlem Renaissance. I can't say it's like the 90s either, where it's just like back to back to back. But it is a very interesting time that we're in, where we're looking at black films, we're looking at black cinema, we're looking at the influence of blackness and the imagery that we consume on an everyday, in the shows that we look at, and the different types of films that we look at. It's just a very interesting time that we're in, especially in how we view blackness and how things are separating, and how we're not only seeing blackness as something that is a whole, but blackness is something that includes apparently everybody, but then nobody, but this people, that people. It's a lot that's going on. And so I do wonder what would further be, the cinema that shows black people, especially when we have these diaspora wars and diaspora debates, how that will persist as we move on into the future. What would that look like? What would be the different things that we will be able to see in our in the movies that we grew up looking at? So this was fun. I'm gonna do another book reading. I don't know if I'm gonna do one again today, or I might do it another time. But I'm gonna make this a constant thing. I want to make this a thing where I look at a lot of different things going into blackness in cinema, the idea of blackness, the idea of American identity, and maybe even other cultures. So recommend me some other books if you want to. I might make a post and say book recommendations and other different types of recommendations that you guys may think that I should, look into and read on live. Okay, this was fun. Peace out.